Your Excellencies and members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of government, the private sector, academia, NGOs, webinar participants from across Canada and the Americas, including some of our own colleagues in Latin America and the Caribbean. Friends all, the IICA delegation in Canada welcomes you to our annual accountability seminar. Good morning, friends. Good morning, friends. Miembros del cuerpo diplomático, oficiales del gobierno, sector privado, organizaciones no gubernamentales, academia, amigos y compatriotas de IICA que nos acompañan por transmisión por Internet. Bienvenidos y buenos días. Chers amis et collègues, bienvenue et bonjour à tous. That deserves a little, come on. Thanks, I'm trying. As the accountability seminar, otherwise known as the Rendición de Cuentas, is a high point of our annual calendar, we're pleased that you're able to share it with us today. This year's event is even more special due to the presence of our Director General, Dr. Villalobos, who has charted the course that our institute has been taking over the last few years throughout all 34 countries. As you may know, Dr. Villalobos is currently midway his second term in office, so we feel honored that he's on hand to give highlights of our institute's performance at institutional level. And this is based on our medium-term plan for 2014 to 18. Please help me in welcoming our Director General. Recently, we experimented with including a special feature in our accountability seminar. Some of you may recall that in 2014, we had a panel discussion on the Americas being positioned to feed the world. In 2015, we had a panel discussion, very lively discussion, on engaging youth today to feed the world tomorrow. Based on your own feedback, this addition to our seminar has been wildly successful. So you will not be disappointed today as we continue with this feature. As part of our program, we have two luminaries who will explore an issue that has been challenging technicians and politicians alike. So friends, our morning's session is designed to not only inform you, but also to involve you and to inspire you towards our joint and collaborative action. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Audia Barnett, and I am the representative of the Office in Canada for the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. I'm joined by my team members, Trudy Werry, Technical and Performance Coordinator, Trudy. Isabelle Giroux, Office Manager. Pedro Chacon, Technical Cooperation Specialist. And Christina Jimenez, our Administrative Assistant. Christina is apparently registering some latecomers, so greet her afterwards. It's our distinct pleasure to host you at our seminar today, and we invite your full and active participation as we harvest our results for 2015. Again, I extend my warm welcome. You have a package in front of you which will guide you through this morning's procedures. we want to introduce a new feature in our seminar, and this is doing a bit of a polling. We want to hear how you feel on certain aspects. So I think we have 2 poll questions. We are going to ask persons to, well, first of all, I have to encourage you to tweet. Our youngsters last year encouraged us that we need to tweet and spread the news, spread the good news of what is happening here in Canada and within the IICA family. So feel free to tweet as you desire. The hashtags are on your program. But we're also going to be doing a poll at I think just 2 poll questions. And this is going to be on slido.com. So you go on your smartphone and you, through your internet browser, go to slido.com, enter the number 3070, and you'll just answer the questions. Very, very easy. It will take 15 seconds. So I'm going to encourage you to indulge us in participating in this poll. At this time, I'm going to introduce our Director General, and our Director General, Dr. Villalobos, is coming directly, well, not directly, I must share a joke with you. I saw the Director General with this pin with Canada and IICA. As a matter of fact, one of our colleagues noticed it yesterday. And I said, how do you remember these things, Director General? Because he was coming from about 4 different countries. So we are really, really pleased that he's here with us today, because he came via, other commitments, but he made it possible. So, Director General, please, I welcome you to the podium.
Thank you, Audia. Good morning to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here with you this morning. Canada has been an important member of IICA for many years and has provided resources, both human and financial, in some important areas of IICA's work. These include, but are not limited to Codex Alimentarius, biotechnology, SPS issues, food safety, global affairs of Canada priorities, food security, and climate change. For Codex, Canada has been an important partner in the Americas and Caribbean for developing a spirit of solidarity among delegations from North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean to promote science-based standard settings for food safety and food standards. This has been a remarkable foreign agriculture policy success for Canada and IICA member countries. Recently, the discipline and solidarity of the Americas has been shared with African nations, and they too have developed a new solidarity with this hemisphere on the embrace of science at this international standard-setting body. This year, Health Canada officials providing training to colleagues in the Bahamas and support their efforts to develop Codex-aligned regulations on veterinary drugs residues. Biotechnology is an important tool to help farmers grow more with less, as well as introduce innovation to improve productivity, reduce also pesticides use, and combat the multiple challenges to grow food, fever, and feed. Canada has been a strong partner of IICA for help training our member nations on biosafety regulations, as well as prepare for the meetings on the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. Canada has shared lessons learned and best practices related to the Government of Canada priorities, including strengthening regulatory requirements across mandates and sharing of data. I recall my work with Canada on the North American Biotechnology Initiative, NABI, and I was very grateful for Canada's support during the protocol meetings in Kuala Lumpur many years ago. I am pleased to report that NABI is still going strong, as are similar initiatives in Central America and the Southern Cone. SPS issues are always of importance of each nation Ministry of Agriculture. Canada has been an important supporter of IICA's agriculture, health, and food safety technical area, which is actively working on multiple issues ranging from foot and mouth disease to control the Mediterranean fruit fly, citrus greening, and avian influenza. Ensuring the science-based control of pests, diseases, and outbreaks is vital to ensuring fair trade and commerce. The delegation in Canada seeks to address priority needs identified for both Latin American countries and Canada. A recent project in Peru and Colombia is an example of win-win type of projects. The initiative that supports a balanced trade with countries that has been identified as a priority by Global Affairs Canada. The projects initially aimed to build capacity to meet sanitary trade requirements, and in the long term, increases trade will contribute to farmers' incomes, rural development, and sustainable supply chains for Canada. Food safety is rising in prominence through the hemisphere. With the new food safety laws in Canada and United States, IICA today serves as a platform for those nations to train government officials, exporters, food manufacturers, and producers on how to comply with natural and private sectors' global food safety standards. IICA is working with the governments and the private sector to increase compliance and help building hemispheric culture of food safety. Important components of this not only include good traditional practices and good manufacturing practices, but also the responsible use of pesticides, veterinary drugs, and science-based standards for maximum residue limits and antimicrobial resistance. The example of work with Peru and Canada also applies to the issue of food safety. Information was shared by IICA with the members of the diplomatic corps in Latin America and the Caribbean on the exporting food and Canada current and future regulatory framework. Participants value the information received on how to position both the public and private sectors in countries exporting to Canada, given the expected changes in import requirements. Increasing food security is one of the focus areas of Canada's international assistance. We also understand that Canada will providing assistance to countries that are vulnerable to the destabilizing effects of climate change. Canada's assistance focuses on the Caribbean, Colombia, Haiti, Honduras, and Peru. Your partners countries are Bolivia, Cuba, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. In Haiti, for instance, Canada is funding 17 million system for agriculture credit and insurance to improve access to credits for small and medium entrepreneurs. Also, Canada has recently engaged in a humanitarian assistance to Ecuador after the earthquake. IICA is starting ready to assist Canada with its aid efforts in all of these countries, including we hope, Cuba sometime soon. In the area of food security, with the help of the University of Rafael Landívar and Canada's McGill's University, IICA and IDRC trained 500 people on food and nutrition security programs in Guatemala about the factors that influence chronic child malnutrition and identified effective ways to combat it. In response to the rising challenge that climate change is presenting to farmers, IICA is helping countries to assess their vulnerability, effectively manage the risk, and enhance the resilience of their production systems. Using our various mechanisms of technical cooperation, IICA is strengthening national and regional capacities through training courses of the dissemination of relevant, scientifically sound information and appropriate techniques, methodologies, and good practices that enable countries to take informed decisions and implement the enabling policies necessary to successfully adapt and transform the agriculture sectors in response to a changing climate. As most of you know, I have a special place in my heart for this wonderful country. I received my PhD at the University of Calgary, and I even have a Canadian daughter who was born when I was studying here in Canada. Whether the terrible forest fire in Alberta this month is a product of climate change or just the natural fury of Mother Nature, please know that my thoughts and my prayers and those of all of us in IICA are with our Canadian brothers and sisters of Alberta. I know that Canadians are a resilient society, resilient people, and I am sure the building of lives and economy affected will overcome rapidly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director General. And if you have any questions, we ask you to hold them until after the presentation on IICA Canada. You see why we're so proud to belong to the IICA family. I mean, the Director General could speak at length on a lot more achievements of IICA over the last year. For example, over the last year, IICA was able to train 27,000 persons in various types of field technical areas, and persons ranging from policymakers straight down to farmers who are working in the field. Such an awesome organization. At this time, I want to have our first poll question. And this is not a test on the DG's presentation, trust me. Okay, so in your opinion, IICA can best contribute to the agri-food sector by, and it's done already. Oh, so this is the results. Okay, so we're ahead of the game. I'm behind. Okay, so 50% of you said joint projects. 33% said sharing knowledge and information in Latin America and the Caribbean. 17% said building capacity for science-based decision making, and 0 in terms of facilitating harmonized positions on agricultural health and food safety standards. Do you want some more time? Those of you who did not get a chance to go on. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few minutes while you continue. So let's take that off so that we don't influence them. Okay. At this time, I'm going to invite Trudy Werry, who is our Technical and Performance Coordinator in the office, pretty new to our team, but has certainly added value in all that we do. I'm going to ask Trudy to present our work And, we feel our achievements over the last year. Trudy, please.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Bonjour. I'm very pleased to be here to present IICA Canada's 2015 annual report. C'est un plaisir pour moi de vous présenter notre rapport annuel. You'll have the summary document of our report in your packages, which you can refer to later, but I'll cover most of it in this presentation. Here we go. My presentation today will cover first the context for the period 2015. It was the first year that we implemented the Institute's overall strategic plan, the medium-term plan, as well as implemented our country strategy for last year. But the main part of the presentation will be, of course, the summary of our results. I will briefly describe in this presentation the main elements of this medium-term plan, the period 2014 to 2018. The medium-term plan outlines our technical cooperation model. It's a model of how we conduct our business. It's in accordance to our objectives and with a focus on producing results. It's our strategic plan of how we go forward for the next 4 years. Under the plan, we have our strategic objectives and helps us focus on our work. Our objectives related to agricultural productivity, rural development, climate change, the adaptation and mitigation that's necessary for the sector, and the subject of today's discussion and dialogue. And of course, very importantly, food security. Rather than working on a diverse set of programs, the Institute, for the first time, is now focused on 5 flagship projects. These projects give concrete expression to the work that we do. It's the glue that brings all the 34 countries under IICA together. There are main instruments for producing results, and under each of these flagship projects, there's a set of interrelated actions to be carried out by all of the member countries over the 4-year period. So the projects include agricultural chains, inclusion, resilience, family agriculture, and agricultural health and food safety. Our work under all of those 5 projects is expected to produce results. It's expected to contribute to 1 or more of the 11 contributions. And I won't read them for you here, but it's our intention to make significant contributions in all of these areas. But we don't do it alone. We do it with partners. And our contributions together, working with our partners, we hope, will result in those major transformations that are so important for agricultural development and food security. The previous slide spoke to our plans, our strategic directions, and our plans. But of course, what's important and what we're talking about today is demonstrating our results. This is a copy, and there's copies available on the side tables, of the overall Institute's 2015 results. Today's presentation is just focusing on our own country office's results. And as you know, we're a small group. There's 5 today, but really last year there were really only 4 of us because I started at the end of March and Pedro joined us in September. So it was 4 people last year. But although small, we're mighty because behind us is a very dynamic institute. And IICA has many partners and many friends. So we can rely on that network, our colleagues and friends, to produce the results that I'm going to present to you today. So moving on to the context at the country level. Our efforts to plan the delegation's work in Canada here was laid out in the 2014 to 2018 country strategy. The activities that are outlined in this document, and we'll probably have copies available of this as well, they were jointly selected with our partners to establish the priorities for Canada. And this was finalized, actually. This was part of our work for last year because we only finalized this strategy in 2015. Based on that strategy, we develop a work plan for each year. And this is to guide all of our activities to achieve the expected outcomes and results. Last year, we established the following areas of focus: communications, results-based management, research collaborations, partnerships, again being important, technical cooperation, which is the bulk of our work, support for that, as well as some work in two of the flagship projects, one having to do with inclusion and the second one having to do with competitive and productive agricultural chains. So based on these areas of focus, we established our expected outcomes, and then we planned our activities around those expected outcomes. And we achieved results in all of those areas. Internally, within IICA, we have a system that all the member countries used for planning, monitoring, and reporting on our results. Here's a screenshot of that system, and I apologize because you can't really read the details, but it's the summary sort of report of our results of last year, indicating that we achieved about 94% of what we set out to do. So these results that I'll now move to were summarized in another document in your package, the main features of which I'll cover in this presentation. First, I'd like to speak to a significant achievement, as mentioned by our DG. On last year, we completed a phase of one of our multi-year projects. So you've heard about it in the last few seminars, but this major project was supporting opportunities for Peruvian and Colombian exporters, small producers and enterprises. It was undertaken with the support of the Government of Canada under the Canada Americas Trade-Related Technical Assistance Program. It was administered by the Conference Board of Canada. We're very appreciative of the support that was given. But the multi-year program supported training and capacity building in the rural communities to enhance their opportunities for trade to Canada. But last year, we made efforts to forge closer relationships with Canadian importers, with Canadian buyers, so that those producers could understand what the Canadian marketplace requirements were. We supported two missions, one to Peru, one to Colombia, with Canadian buyers of tilapia, cacao, and panela. And the outcomes from that sub-project exceeded our indicators. We have a short clip of a video that I'm going to show right now. The longer video will be available on our website if you're interested. And we produced this video in order to encourage more involvement and compliance with for the training that we delivered, so that we could have some sustainability of the project in the longer term. And you'll hear it includes a buyer, one of the buyers that was involved in last year's phase as well.
La demanda por alimentos saludables y de calidad, respaldada por los tratados de libre comercio firmados por Canadá con Colombia y Perú, motivaron que el Instituto Interamericano de Cooperación para la Agricultura y el Programa de Asistencia Técnica Relativa al Comercio Canadá-Américas, avalados por Global Affairs Canada, se unan con organizaciones gubernamentales y gremiales de ambos países para desarrollar el proyecto. Fortalecimiento de la capacidad en las pequeñas y medianas empresas peruanas y colombianas para entender y cumplir las medidas sanitarias y fitosanitarias de Canadá, incrementando así sus oportunidades de exportación. 5 productos con posibilidades de exportación a Canadá fueron seleccionados por el proyecto. En Perú, el cacao y la quinoa orgánicos. En Colombia, la panela orgánica, el filete de tilapia y las hierbas aromáticas y culinarias.
And it was absolutely fantastic. It was extremely interesting. The farmers were very warm, very friendly, very interested in improving, and it was a really outstanding opportunity. The quality of product that was produced was extremely good. The facility that did the fermentation and drying was fascinating to be a part of.
La visita de los señores de Canadá me pareció muy interesante porque los vi como muy interesados en la panela, en vender la panela a ellos. Les gustó que fuera orgánica.
Bueno, darle los agradecimientos al IICA por todas sus prácticas y por todas sus enseñanzas que nos trajeron aquí a la región y que esperamos seguirlos teniendo por aquí para seguir aprendiendo más de ellos.
A los productores o a otros empresarios parecidos a los de la central de mieles les diría que es un proyecto muy bueno, que abre muchas posibilidades.
Yo creo que ha sido más provechoso porque no solamente ha sido en teoría, lo hemos hecho en la práctica. Se ha impuesto en práctica lo que se ha enseñado en teoría. Y eso está en las parcelas de los socios donde hemos implementado.
Creo que he mejorado en mi forma de vida y también creo que en mi forma de salud. De esa manera también tengo un poco más de cuidado con las cosas que yo estoy haciendo aquí dentro de mi parcela y tanto con mi familia. Por ejemplo, económicamente también me ha ido brindando un poco más de bienestar.
Las capacitaciones nos han traído muchos beneficios para poder exportar nuestros productos a otros países.
Estos productores, los 20 que recibieron la capacitación o todos los talleres, ¿no? Entonces han podido implementar, captar y ahora están haciendo un efecto de, ¿cómo se llama?, de transferencia, ¿no?, a sus demás compañeros.
So as I was saying, the longer video will be on our website. I welcome you to look it up. Continuing on with our results in 2015, a good part of our mandate is to generate and to share knowledge. And our office administers a research and internship assistance program. It's a program that has been running in Canada for over 20 years now. And there were 2 projects last year. And these projects related to our flagship projects, one relating to the agricultural chains project, and the second related to resilience. And if you look on the side during our break afterwards, you can see the results from those projects. We also supported Dr. Anthony Thomas, who's here in the room with us. We're pleased to have him. Anthony, can you stand up so people can perhaps see you later? We're very pleased with the work that he's done on a project related to climate change, adaptation, and agriculture. Dr. Thomas was hosted by the British Columbia Ministry of Agriculture and Food. BC is in the forefront of all the provinces in Canada in their efforts to mitigate and adapt the sector for climate change impacts. And we really appreciated the work, the support provided by the staff of the Ministry of Agriculture and Food in British Columbia for his work. He studied the best practices in performance management and recommended a framework for the ministry as well as resiliency indicators for the BC program. Of course, his recommendations will be significant to other organizations. In addition to that study, he also did a synopsis on this quite important program running in BC, and he highlighted their approach and the tools that they used for possible adaptation to the Latin American and Caribbean countries. So we're hoping that his study will have significance for other countries and other regional programs that are looking to get some resiliency indicators and some performance management. That's how we're going to attract some funding and some really be able to demonstrate our results in this work. Please help yourself to the 2 reports that he has at the table if you're interested. Continuing on how we share knowledge, we heard from our DG about some of the work that we've done from the requests that we received for information on Canada's new food safety legislation. As well, an information session on the role of the Americas in addressing global food challenges took place at the World Strategic Forum, a conference to address the major governance challenges of the world. And our DG was chairing that session. As well, you've heard, and many of you were here for this session on engaging youth in agriculture and the importance, the challenges, and opportunities. Supporting technical cooperation in the Americas. This is our delegation's, one of our delegation's main function. It's really the bread and butter of our work. To provide the rapid response to the requests that we receive in our office from member countries or even from our colleagues here in Canada to connect in with the Latin American Caribbean countries. And last year we responded to a number of requests, such as we mentioned about the Bahamas developing their vet drug residue regulations. We often have information requirements on Canadian import requirements, and we try to connect in with our colleagues in the federal departments. Export market analysis. Suriname trying to develop their livestock sector, and Canada has a lot to offer. Both government officials as well as industry officials. We also find that these efforts, which may be, small at first, but they often lead to lasting relationships and additional sort of contributions, the possibility of how one small request can lead into projects and to result in significant contributions. Efforts were undertaken with provincial ministries of agriculture last year to promote the adoption of an IICA initiative called Agri-Profiles. This is a platform where experts, researchers can share their profiles and create new linkages with their colleagues in Latin American and Caribbean countries. This office received, as you know, a number of requests, and this makes it very efficient to identify contacts in Canada and to make sure those linkages are made with their counterparts. ProSynarte, a network of researchers and technical experts in Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. This is another long-standing contribution of Canada's, and this office has supported it, as well as the people in this room who have been involved in ProSynarte for a number of years. Last year was the first year that Audia assumed the role of executive secretary for ProSynarte, and our office with Christina have supported the 6 significant activities that were carried out last year. Activities related to knowledge transfer, as well as innovation, testing of fruit for maturity, a test that may have wide applicability in other countries. Our office is also supporting the board of directors for ProSynarte and, of course, helping them out with some of their management functions related to the task force. Communications. We dedicate significant efforts to communicate with you, our stakeholders. We make these efforts to tell our story and to encourage your input and your direction in where we're going, what we're working on. As you know, we have a number of meetings with many different groups, as well as we produce some communication products, such as our newsletters and efforts to update via website and Twitter and newspaper articles. And we try to tell our story through our planning and reporting efforts. Lastly, I'd like to tell you about our work to encourage partnerships. The Institute relies heavily on partnerships to generate the solutions that we need to the many challenges that the hemisphere faces in the sector. And as I mentioned, our Institute is trying to contribute, but transformations in agricultural development and food security happen when all partners are making a contribution. So, consistent with our commitment in our medium-term plan and in our country strategy, we try to connect, we try to identify new partners, and we try to reconnect with those existing partners. And we've listed the ones that in 2015 we had more connections with because we worked with you to either develop project proposals or to address the technical cooperation requests or to collaborate in research. And it's a very, very important part of our work. But this leads us to what we'd like to do, and that is acknowledge those of us who have supported us in achieving the results. And I'd like to turn back to Audia for the acknowledgement of our partners and those that work with us.
Thanks, Trudy. I get the easy part. Okay, so we want to express our thanks to our many, many partners. Some of you have been with us for a while, and some last year we just signed agreements or did various joint activities with. We want to especially mention AFC, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and we have some representatives from AFC here, and I want to single out Daryl and Vanessa because they have really helped to guide us and support us in more ways than one, both in terms of our technical programs in the office as well as at the institutional level, contributing to the administrative role of Canada in IICA, in the IICA family. So I want to really thank you, Vanessa and Darren. Global Affairs Canada, we have a long-standing arrangement with Global Affairs Canada. And last year, we had new partners, and I think this year we have some more new partners, but that's fine. We have been able to, through our semestral meetings, share information with our close colleagues at Global Affairs Canada. We have several associate organizations, CFIA, tremendous support last year. We have Pedro with us for the next year and a half now. And Pedro is from the CFIA. He's seconded. He's with us for 2 years. And you recall last time we had Charles. And Charles isn't here. Tell him that I missed him. But yes, Pedro is going to be here. And this is a mutually beneficial arrangement because I think CFIA benefits because when Pedro goes back, he's going to be a different animal. He has been able to absorb the international development scene and multitask, and he's going back to add value to his role at CFIA. But we also benefit from his own technical experience and expertise from CFIA. So we want to thank CFIA, and as well as for their support in other ways. You know, I think Trudy mentioned the Bahamas when we were able to support a technical request there. British Columbia, I think we may have them online on the webinar, and if you are Hi Ian, this is a new partner for us, and we're happy that Anthony was able to do that study in British Columbia. Cynthia is here, and Cynthia is going to play a role in our next session. But and so more on Cynthia, but tremendous support and valuable guidance from Cynthia. We have several consultants that we have worked with over the year, as well as our country offices, and very strong support from our headquarters, from human resources, finance, you name it. And I think Trudy had shared with you that snapshot in terms of our performance, and that is a tool that headquarters has developed and honed, and it's really of tremendous value to us as we monitor our own performance. Interns that have worked with us, especially Anthony and the team, and I will speak about that later, our own team here in Canada as well as in some of our partner countries. So I want to acknowledge all the partners we worked with last year, and we really value your contributions, and we look forward to your continued support. At this time, I'm going to get an update on the polls for the Slido. While you write your questions from Trudy's or Dr. Villalobos' presentation, you have a choice. You can write your questions on the papers provided at each table, or you can go to the microphone. There are 2 microphones in the room if you want to ask a question or make an observation or a comment. We're here to assist. And online, our webinar participants, please feel free to send your questions. We have someone here who will pass the questions on to us if you need to make a question or make an intervention of some sort. So Slido, more of the same. No, joint project. Yes, joint projects. 36% of you say that we need to do more joint projects. We need to do projects with IICA. We have shown ourselves to be a solid partner. 27%, closely followed by 27% capacity building for science-based decision-making, and we have been doing quite a bit of work in that area, and we envisage that in the future we'll be doing that. Sharing knowledge and information in Latin America and the Caribbean. This area, we see our office really evolving into one of knowledge management, providing a knowledge management platform between Canada and the rest of the region. And as Trudy mentioned, both serving our constituents here in Canada as well as our stakeholders in LAC. And facilitating harmonized positions on agricultural health and food safety standards, 9%. Thank you so much for contributing to this poll, and I'm sure by the end of this year or at our next accountability seminar, you will see some shift if we ask the same questions. Okay, at this time, we are open for questions. Any burning questions, please indicate if you have questions on your sheets, and then someone will pick them up, or if you need to go to the microphone. If you just signal with your hand, we have one question here, and usually once one person starts, everyone goes. So thank you so much for asking the first question, please.
I'm Shane Roberts. I'm with the United Nations Association. And what I'm wondering in relation to the potential impacts of climatic change is, are you involved, any of your support or encouragement of research or transfer of knowledge of any effort to try to monitor what may be happening in terms of damage from extreme weather, the spread of diseases among animals or plants? Is there any effort yet to start to measure potential impacts? And I know it has to be a potential because there's a debate of how much climate change is already biting and how much it may be other problems. So I'm wondering, is there an effort to try and just get a sense of how things might be happening?
Okay. Maybe I should throw that hot potato somewhere else. But I'm going to ask for help with that question. But just... First of all, one of the strengths of IICA, especially in this program, this medium-term plan, is actually laying out some baseline studies. So we were able to see whatever intervention, what's the impact of that intervention. The study that Anthony did, for example, in terms of looking at indicators and performance measurements, that can contribute. So you'll be able to see, and we actually have a project that Trudy come and talk about, that we are trying to get some partners. So if you're interested, please let us know. We're trying to put together a project to do some of what you just asked, so that we are able to measure and demonstrate illustrate in a very discreet way some of the impacts. So I don't know, Trudy, would you want to add to that? Or Anthony? And when we have our discussion, we're going to touch on that too. We're going to have a lively discussion shortly, and I'm sure that that will also address some of your questions. Thank you so much. So you're disappointing me. He asked the question, where's the deluge of persons? Please, thank you, High Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Audia, and thank you very much, Director General. I'm Janice Miller. I'm the High Commissioner for Jamaica to Canada. I just wanted to find out I just have two questions. Firstly, in your program in dealing with climate change, as you know, when we had the discussions in Paris, small island developing states had a very clear case to make in it, as to the impacts of climate change on our particular economies and societies. So I was wondering if you had any particular programs within IICA Canada dealing with small island developing states, looking at their own unique vulnerabilities. Secondly, I was very interested to see the work that IICA is doing based on the free trade agreements with Colombia and Peru. Of course, the Caribbean countries had been trying to get a free trade agreement with Canada, and those negotiations were suspended. But we did receive a waiver on CBI up to, I think it's 2023, I believe. So I was wondering whether there are any particular projects that you have envisaged for the Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean, under that particular CBI program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, High Commissioner. In terms of SIDS, small island developing states, and the specific vulnerabilities of these states, the office in Canada has not yet identified, a project for it. We're hoping that through the work that Anthony has done, we could put together a project. But there are several interventions from IICA in general in the region, and we have, I think, as we speak now, there's a session taking place, a virtual session launching some work that has just been done in the Caribbean, specifically targeting the small island states and the impacts of climate change on these states, looking at agriculture in particular, because you know that the impacts are varied. DJ, you have anything to add to that? Do you?
Perhaps we'll be back to the question of gentlemen from the United Nations. I would like just to mention, not in the region, in Central America, we have some examples how the climate change impacts agriculture. Specifically, 3 years ago, we had a severe attack of roya rust on coffee. That affects all the Central American producing coffee countries. And there were more than 600,000 farmers affected, and that creates, of course, other kind of problems because they rely, of course, they live on 3 or 4 hectares of coffee, and without any harvest, then that was a social problem as a consequence of this damage, this specific race of roya disease in the region. So we, after 3 years, we implement, along with many other partners, a mechanism through which now I can say we bring the presence of roya rust in coffee out the normal conditions through which we can control that, and then we recuperate the production, even though that the price of coffee is not as good as it used to be. So that's a sign of the impact of unpredictable factors associated with climate change. Regarding our role in the Caribbean countries, of course, we are concentrated mainly in adaptation of agriculture to the climate change, and that's something that we are being carry on in countries like Caribbean countries as well as Central America. So in that we have a package. Depends, of course, of the kind of crops that we are dealing with or the kind of conditions through which we are working, whether we are talking about small communities of producers or associations of producers, or the kind of crops that they are working with a very simple and very not too expensive techniques. And in that respect, we are for instance, working very hard on water, soil conservation, and integrated pest management, mainly as a techniques that will adapt and will, I would say, prepare the farmers to be more prepared for problems associated with climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, DG. Anthony, you had anything? Did I see your hand? Okay, please come ahead.
Just a response to the earlier question. It has been recognized that, especially in the Caribbean, that efforts has not been made to document or to record the impacts of climate change in the agricultural sector, especially in communities. And the recommendation, I think that is one of the recommendations in my studies, is that investments ought to be made to rigorously document, those perceived, even real impacts, and not only to document them, but also to monitor them over time, so that trends can be established, and of course mitigation and adaptation efforts can be planned, accordingly. So I think this is an area that ought to be seriously looked at. We often speak about climate change and the effects. But if you were to visit any community, let's say in one of the Caribbean islands, I doubt you may find on record the actual impact. So I think that is an area that seriously needs some attention.
Thank you so much. And High Commissioner, you had asked a question about the Caribbean Basin Initiative. Okay. Okay. No, but that's an opportunity, and maybe we can speak afterwards to see how best we can utilize that in packaging some opportunities for projects. I just saw Mushtaq.
Thank you. This is Mushtaq Ahmed. I'm Senior Food Security Advisor at Global Affairs Canada. I have been in the Caribbean for quite a number of years as an advisor from the Commonwealth Secretariat, and also as a chairman of the New Guyana Marketing Corporation for a while. So that gave me an opportunity to go around the island states and promote issues with respect to non-traditional agriculture other than rice and sugar. So what I saw there is that in the new context of globalization, the global value chain and things like that, the small farmers are not connected. They are not incorporated into the global value chain. What to speak of their local ones, it's not there. The situation, there's a Propel project going on in the Caribbean, and when they sent me for a review, I sent them back, about 10 years old, a report that I prepared as a task force leader. And they said, did you do it now? It seems everything remains still. It didn't change. So those connectivity is missing. So when you're talking about value chain, the connectivity is important. All these areas, the small farmers is not part of the process, basically. So and also within the island states, the inter-regional, inter-island, interstate trade is rudimentary. It's very minimal.
Thanks for that observation, and hence our focus in our flagship project on chains, agricultural chains, because we have recognized that is one of the weaknesses in our countries. So thanks for that observation. I'm sure that we'll see some change, some incremental change at the end of our contributions at the end of the 4 years. Please.
Hello, my name is Frederick Brown-Welch. I'm with a law firm called Bauer Morse Law. My question was relating to the work that you're doing with regulatory harmonization. I saw that there's been some work on the SPS matters, but I was wondering if there's been any thought put into technical capacity building on the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources, for example, or development of farmers' rights, essentially promoting sustainable agriculture laws. I know that in Costa Rica there are quite a lot of very useful laws that are essentially transforming the way agriculture is done and agricultural outputs are generated. I was just wondering if you're your technical cooperation on the legal side or regulatory side will go beyond just harmonizing these sanitary, phytosanitary requirements to more broad-based assistance to, I guess, legal reform or regulatory reform that goes beyond just the scientific side. Thanks.
Okay, I'm not sure if DG want to weigh in on this one too. In general, we have been helping to advise our countries, to inform them so that they have a good understanding of the big picture when they go to some of these negotiation rounds, so that they make their decision and their interventions based on knowledge, objective information. So yes, we will give them the big picture, but I'm not sure of any specific intervention and in one area, such as farmers' rights, for example. There might be some projects that we have on the ground, for example, in Brazil and some of the other countries that are focusing on family agriculture that may touch on that, but not from our office. DG or Trudy?
Very briefly, just to mention again what Audi just emphasized, that the amount of people being trained by IICA in conjunction with and collaboration with many other partners. Last year, we trained more than 27,000 people in different areas. And I would like to say that about almost 10,000 officials, members of the ministries, were trained in SPS issues. So what we believe and we think is that the possibility to update information, the possibility to facilitate all these sometimes officials that represent the countries in the international forum, be more prepared, be more aware what the things are changing and the new requirements and the new mechanisms to be able to participate actively in this fora is part of this training, this strong and very active training activity that we conduct in conjunction with different partners and certainly with the countries.
Thanks. We have time for just one last question, please.
I hope I can make it good. Okay. Good morning. I'm Kervin Lloyd from the High Commission for St. Kitts and Nevis. Agriculture and water, we know, are inextricably linked. Climate change, however, is causing water to become a huge issue for everybody in the Caribbean, in the East, in the West, etc. Flooding, drought, in some areas, more intense natural disasters. What I want to ask is if IICA is finding itself becoming more deeply involved in the discussion for better water management internationally.
Certainly, and I know the DG wants to answer this one because he has done quite a bit of work in terms of addressing that water issue. And this was coming from way above in terms of the Inter-American Board of Agriculture. That's a mandate from our highest board of governance. DG.
Just perhaps, if you allow me, we can share a document that we prepare for the ministerial board that we have prepared last year. So each country has been representing this document in which we not just only review what the situation is, but also what kind of recommendations we can make. So the document is available.
Okay, and remember, I'm hoping that most of you will join us for lunch and we can continue the discussion if you didn't get a chance to ask your questions or too shy. And we still have the papers. You can leave the questions and we will certainly get the answers to you via email. At this time, we want to switch gears. Thanks again, Trudy, for that wonderful presentation. Friends, you spoke, we listened, and we heard. The issue of resilience in the face of climate change was ranked by you, our stakeholders, as a top priority theme for Canada. And this is during our consultations in 2014 and 15. As our Director General has indicated, this issue also has strong resonance in Latin America and the Caribbean countries, and this led to IICA dedicating major efforts through the form of its flagship project on resilience and comprehensive management of environmental risk for agricultural production. Our delegation is therefore very happy, we are very pleased to be able to attract top-notch scientists who have been working on specific related aspects for them to share their thoughts with us today. To get this conversation going, it's my privilege to invite Ms. Cynthia Curry, former IICA representative who has had many years' experience in Canada's agricultural sector, both at the private and public sector levels, to act as moderator. So at this stage, I will hand over to Cynthia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Odia. I'm well equipped here. I've got my fisherman's friends. I have my glass of water, and I've got numerous pieces of paper, and I'm going to be sitting down in a moment, but just to share with you, the reason why I mention that is that someone recently said to me that this is one of the few places in the world where you can wear your summer clothes one day and your winter clothes the next day. Or in the same day sometimes, exactly, as we've seen here in Ottawa recently. And whether this is attributed to climate change or not, I think we can have a debate on that. But obviously, climate change is a subject that is something that we have to talk about and is something that we have to deal with, not just talk about. We have to deal with it. So I am not the expert in climate change. And I have two very, very good experts here with me. And what we're going to do is actually be a little more informal. These three chairs are not musical chairs. These three chairs are here. One is for me, I believe, and two is for our presenters. So I will be sitting here with them, and in conversation style, I will be discussing with them and getting their views on climate change, and also getting their views on the subject that we have here at hand. So if you will just give us a couple of seconds, we can invite our presenters up. I can put down all of the stuff that I have here in my hand, and then we can get at it. So you want me to stand here? I'll move a little bit away from our two presenters so that they don't catch my cold, which is what I'm suffering from right now. I have no idea whether this thing's on or not. Is it? Perfect. You know, when you've been retired for a couple of years, you don't normally walk around with these types of things. So it's... you want me to come closer? For the camera. Oh, for the camera? Oh. That's the least of my worries right now. Yeah, thank you very much. Is that okay, or is that better? That's better? Okay, good. Better is okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm so pleased to have this opportunity, quite frankly, to engage in this conversation about such an important topic. Climate change, a trigger for building resilience in food systems. And I just want to say a special hello and welcome to the Director General de IICA. Bienvenido otra vez a Canada. Bienvenido. I want to stress, quite frankly, that this conversation, in which our two eminently qualified participants, or conversationalists, if that's a word, I might call them, will engage each other on the topic, and then at the end of the back and forth, we will engage with you, the audience, and with people on the webinar. We hope that you will leave here more knowledgeable and more engaged and challenged to return to your respective offices or organizations to deal with this subject. As you've heard this morning from Dr. Villalobos and also from Odia Barnett, and in the review of IICA Canada's 2015 annual report, work is already taking place across the hemisphere to deal with the impact of climate change on agriculture. But what I also heard this morning is that more needs to be done. So I'd like to first of all commend IICA Canada for making this opportunity available to us all to continue the conversation And I want to especially thank our conversationalists, Dr. Bizikova and Dr. Melgar Quinones, for agreeing to share their knowledge with us. Finally, before we begin our conversation, a bit of housekeeping, if I could call it that. I will not be reviewing the bios of our two presenters, as you already have them, and they're very impressive bios, I might say. You already have them in your folders, so take a moment to read them. My role as a moderator only is to facilitate the conversation, if it needs facilitating, between the conversationalists and with the audience. And I will do my best to keep things moving along and to make good use of the roughly, I think, 45 minutes that we have to tackle this subject. So with this background and with this in mind, let's start the conversation. And if I might just pose a question to both you, Olivia and Hugo. What does this topic of climate change, a trigger for building resilience in food systems, really mean to you and to the work that you are doing? So Olivia, if you'd like to start.
Okay, thank you. So we've been working on climate change adaptation for quite many years. And then for last few years, you probably all noticed that suddenly we talk about resilience. We're not talking about climate change adaptation that much. It's still out there, but suddenly it became a resilience kind of discussion. Climate resilience, building resilient systems, resilient cities. And so the question is then what we were interested in is what resilience is, how we know if something is resilient or not, which goes to the measurement, but also how we can actually build resilient systems. And maybe just like few things that I would like to kind of stress on this, that resilience, it may sound, at the beginning it was really this concept that you probably all know from like ecological systems. So you have these complex systems that respond to stress, forest fires, so other pest infestations, and then they rebuild themselves and come up as a different system, but again they function. So these days, when we think of resilience, it's out there. So now I was just looking up quickly for this session, that we're actually talking about psychological resilience. So we as people are supposed to be resilient. And that basically means that we, in the psychological terms, that we are able to adapt to adversity. And that means that we develop effective coping mechanisms depending on the situation over and over again. So resilience is a dynamic concept. And then we are able to basically address the adversity, learn from it, move on, face the new adversity, and basically do this over and over again. And this is something that what we are trying to build in terms of the systems is the resilience. So the system as a whole can respond based on the impacts, whatever it could be, climate change, price shocks, health issues, earthquakes as well, and it's able to recognize it, respond, learn from it, and if something else happens, do it again. And just one more thing. So this is important because when we talk agriculture, food system, food security, these systems have many elements. You have people accessing food, you have people producing food, you have inputs into agriculture, you have production systems, processing systems, markets, global markets, local markets. So it's a very complex system. So in order to make the system able to deal with shocks, it's supposed to be easier from a theoretical point of view to make it strong as resilient, and then it can respond as needed instead of trying to fix every element. And here adaptation could come in, because if I know that my system is not resilient because, let's say, there's a major issue with the seeds that we plant, or there's a major issue with a specific pest coming from climate change, so there is the space where we can use very specific adaptation actions to strengthen the whole resilience of the systems. But within this complex system, we can't just think of that we can, as policymakers, people, farmers, fix everything, because it's complex beyond our actions, beyond our reach. So that's why we are aiming to build something that is resilient. And it can be practically translated in a specific local actions and local measurements, but this is kind of the overview of what we are aiming for when we talk about building resilience.
Fascinating. Hugo?
First of all, thank you very much for having us here. Dr. Villalobos, encantado de verle nuevamente. To your question about what it generates in my mind, perhaps in my heart, and why not in my guts, the issue of climate change as a trigger to resilient food systems. I would first react saying that it's a warning call, but it's not the first one. We have been dealing with many different kinds of insults at the global level. Sometimes we talk about quickly expanding infectious disease. In this case, we're talking about changes in the climate, in the temperatures of the seas, of the lands. We're talking about changes in the rainfall patterns, and how all these affects the way we produce food. We have been talking about climate change for quite a bit, but now it seems like it's getting more and more urgent to discuss these issues and how, if ever, we are able to react or to adapt or to do something about this insult. I think that if we think about, and I'm going to take this angle, and I'm glad that Livia mentioned the psychological aspect, because it has to do with people. And I would say that a resilient food system is resilient if the society is resilient, if the communities are resilient. A resilient community to impacts and to shocks like the ones that are being caused by climate change can only be resilient if the people are resilient. I come from the health sciences, moved through public health into nutrition, and then suddenly I found myself in the Food Security Institute in the Faculty of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences at McGill. And through the time I have been dealing with information as a student, as an academician, as a researcher, I have faced, or I have dealt with different concepts and terms that are in fact very complex. Many years ago, we were talking about community development, right? That was a big topic. Later, we were talking about sustainability, big topic. And now we're talking about resilience. I think that resiliency, from my perspective, perhaps is a bias from my training as a physician in Guatemala, my home country. The focus should be put, first of all, in making people resilient, in making sure that there are social mechanisms that allow people access to the basic needs. A community that doesn't have access to basic health systems, a community that doesn't have access to basic educational systems, a community without a school, or perhaps with a building for a school but without a teacher, a community without the connections to the international market, the smallholder farming communities, without just going by the interventions that we are proposing and promoting, cannot be resilient, and therefore the food system that they belong to cannot be, if dealing with climate change or with any other type of insult. That's my reaction.
Wow, where to start?
This trigger.
Yes, this is fascinating, because you both have mentioned the whole aspect, the human aspect of it all. And at the end of the day, this is what it really means. How do you get down to either the small farmer, as someone mentioned before, or how do you ensure that the human aspect of it is given a chance so that they can become resilient? Because if you don't have education, if you don't have health systems around you, how can you then expect the small farmer? And here we're talking about Latin America and the Caribbean. Let's not forget it. We're not talking about Canada or the U.S. Exclusively. We're talking about Latin America and the Caribbean in particular. And there are more small farmers than there are big farmers. That's just a fact of life. So how do we get to those small farmers then? I know I've heard what you've said, Hugo, and I'd like to get a reaction from Olivia to what Hugo said. But how do we get to those small farmers? Because we're dealing with a situation where we, whether we're governments or policymakers or institutions, can only do so much, regardless of how many partners we have. And so even though we're doing as much as we can do collectively, there's still a need to do more to get to the small farmer, to get to these small communities that we're talking about. So how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we deal with it? Because if we don't deal with it, and as I said, I'm not the expert, but if we don't deal with it, and this is just my observation, then things will become more catastrophic rather than better. So, Olivia, a reaction.
Thank you. So I don't know if I could gotten a harder question, so let me try. So I think, so in our work that deals with resilience, we did a lot of work in Central America and in the Caribbean, where we looked at the key features of resilient system, and we worked with small communities. And just on the part of the action and what Hugo just mentioned about the basic needs, so when we look at what are the most identified actions needed to improve resilience, one is access to healthcare services, gender-sensitive access to healthcare services, and lot in participation in development, in government planning, in local planning. So, and I think that also speaks to the kind of the aspect of resilience, that it's really not just about, so we have the natural systems like the quality of the land, water access, the status of the infrastructure, but it's also very important part is exactly the networks, how the decisions are made, who participates, and the kind of the equal access to information and participation. And that's so that kind of the social part, the policy making part is also very important. And part of the resilience, kind of the lens on the issue of climate change, is also the issue of more effective coordination and more effective targeting. Because for a lot of these communities or places, let's say, a huge improvement could necessarily mean an improvement at the food utilization or food access level, but it could make a much bigger improvement if you, let's say, provide market access, or if you provide rural networks or transportation systems, or how, let's say, there's also could be like what we've seen in the region is a trade barrier because the communities are closer, let's say, to other countries, but they're not allowed to trade that way. They can only trade inside, where there is a very limited market, so prices could go up very high. So identifying what are those places that you can strengthen the system and coordinate these interventions that could come from agriculture, infrastructure development, health issues in an effective way. And while we know from the sustainability discussion that we need to coordinate better, in practice that's very hard to prioritize issues, because every funder, every agency, we have our own agenda, our own plans, our own project. So it becomes very complicated to actually effectively kind of target actions in a way where we can maximize the benefits beyond just the project level.
A reaction again?
How to reach out, how to incorporate the most vulnerable populations, the marginalized groups from the system. I would turn this question around and I would say, how come we haven't done that before? But I think that there are some interesting experiences that we have gathered in a way of approaching and learning instead of teaching from the people who we are supposed to support, for the people who we are supposed to help. And I think the project that Dr. Villalobos mentioned in Guatemala with the University Rafael Andívar is a very interesting example. Through 3 years of work in collaboration with McGill, IICA, and the Institute for Agriculture, Natural Resources and Environment, IARNA, at Rafael Andívar, we established a dialogue with several municipalities in Guatemala. The methodology that we use to learn about what's going on in the food security and nutrition systems in Guatemala was established on a dialogue on developing what are called as mental maps. So through that dialogue, We learned that, in fact, there is a national policy against food insecurity and chronic undernutrition in Guatemala. We learned that there is a national program. We learned that there are resources coming to the municipalities to tackle undernutrition and food insecurity and hunger. But we learn also about the barriers. We learn about the limitations of those interventions. We learn about how the communities feel when an extension is from the National Secretariat for Food Security and Nutrition does have a motorcycle to go to the communities that that person has to attend, but doesn't have gasoline to drive the motorcycle, and so on. So this type of issue, I think reaching out starts with establishing a dialogue. This is one of the examples. The other project that we conducted while I was at Ohio State University and later at McGill as well with Dr. Miguel Garcia, who's now in the IICA office in Washington, D.C. We work in Haiti, in Paraguay, in the Dominican Republic, and it was a similar process. So we developed a project to understand what does it mean to be food secure or food insecure within the small holding environment, farming environment in those countries. The other thing that I want to mention briefly, we could talk for hours about this, and I understand that we have very limited time, but I get passionate about these things. One of the other aspects that I want to mention is that there are elements, there are sectors in the system that we need to learn how to reach. We talk about academia, we talk about the private sector, we talk about the public sector, we even talk about cooperatives or organized farming cooperatives. There are organizations, social organizations in the Latin American countries that perhaps less or more politicized we have been able to talk with. In Guatemala, in the last couple of weeks, 2 very large demonstrations took place in the country. One was the March for Water. Thousands and thousands of farmers marched from different points in the country to the capital city. And last week, thousands of farmers came out in demanding to be heard in their requests for access to natural resources, to land, etc. So I think this dialogue is very important, and joint projects should go beyond the typical institutionalized sectors.
Interesting. Very good. Before we move on, Livia, did you want to make any other comment? Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe just a little bit. So what Hugo mentioned, maybe kind of 2 things. One is that in many countries, one of the challenges when we talk about food security or food and security and nutrition issue is that it's very often spread out between different strategies. So very often when we talk about food security or addressing food-related issues, often it's linked to an agricultural strategy that doesn't have the food insecurity nutrition element. Then we have strategies in health sectors that deal with nutrition. Even the term food security in a literature or in a policy world is a fairly new term. So even at that higher level, when you have different strategies across different departments between the government, there's often very little coordination, coherence, or there even could be barriers or at least lack of kind of coordination. And so it's for many countries, and now you add climate change to it, climate change adaptation to it, climate strategies, so it becomes a fairly complex, even just a policy exercise. And I think that kind of how to basically develop an effective food security-centered strategy that aims to improve security and nutrition, for many countries that's still a challenge. So we don't even have that strategy, and then we have the kind of the lack of the implementation and gaps at the lower level. So it's very complex from a kind of as a task for policymakers in many countries. But that's why regional collaboration, joint projects help, because I think what Hugo was also mentioning is that while this is complex and context-specific, there are many, many similarities. So when we, let's say, worked in different countries, and also I think, Hugo, with these examples, there are many things that are relevant for multiple countries. There is some level of specificity, but there is a very, very high level of transferability. So actually working across countries on the strategy level or on the measurement level or kind of identifying the key barriers for addressing food security, there is a lot more in common than, at the first kind of look at fields that, oh, we are so different and that place is so different. We compared communities that were fisheries lifestyle, livelihoods with communities with agricultural livelihoods. And even there, at that higher level, you can policy, infrastructure, naturally source base, you can actually find lots of similarities between their food security related challenges.
You know, sometimes the very obvious, i.e. the similarities, are the things that divide us, or we don't even recognize it. And I think that's part of the challenge that we have. Hugo, you mentioned, and we've been talking about, food security and resilience of the topic that we have. But could you elaborate on any specific actions that are needed to improve food security and food resiliency?
Well, the actions are multiple and tap into many different, if you want, components of the food security system. But I want to highlight something that was already told. I want to add a little bit to that, and it has to do with the assessment and monitoring of the problems we are dealing with. Believe it or not, after so many years, after 20 years of the World Food Summit and the consensual definition on food security, nowadays we have perhaps only one tool that can measure household food security or individual food security in a direct manner. We work with very complex measurements on the determinants of food security and with very complex measurements on the consequences of food insecurity. And in some cases, those proxies that we are using have very little to do with food and with food security or nutrition. So I think this is an aspect that we need to tackle. I think that FAO has done a very good job lately in understanding the need for tools that tell us what we think they tell us, to do measurements also that are not overwhelmingly complex, overwhelmingly expensive. We have many different tools that require days of interviews in the households, months just to enter the data into a system, analyze, and forget about interpreting the results. There are tools that are being developed that are based on the experience of the people who are basically confronting food insecurity and the challenges that the current food systems are facing. FAO released last week a report that is called The Voices of the Hungry. This is a tool that we have been working with, and I mean we because as a scientific community, this is a collective effort, working on a measurement for 26 years. And just last week, the report was released. It's a measurement that taps directly into the experience of people when dealing with different levels of severity of food insecurity. I think that this type of information should be brought back to the communities, and it's easy to understand and to interpret at the community level as well, because it comes from there. So that's one example. Certainly, the idea that we have been discussing and promoting for a while, but not necessarily always happens. We have been talking also, remember, about the multidisciplinary approach, right? While economists call consumption purchasing food, the dietitians call consumption eating the food. And those are two very different things, although related to each other. So the language we use, but beyond the language and the terms, the harmonization on the terms, the actual development of the real connection between an agriculture intervention and its impact on the nutritional status of people. The evidence that has been gathered for the last 20 years is this big. There are perhaps a handful of papers.
Livia, I understand that you have been doing, or you are doing, some research on measuring the progress in building a resiliency in our food systems. I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit on that, and also talk a little bit about how do the developed countries measure up compared to the lesser developed countries? Like, what is the status of our food systems across the hemisphere?
Yes, so in terms of measurement, like I think the challenge is also that, you know, we can measure and measure, but then we will be just measuring and measuring. So we really need to measure smartly. Like we need to find ways how we can measure things that matter because we can understand the situation, things that matter because it helps us guide in the decision-making process, or seeing the impacts of our decisions. But if we have unlimited time, we can measure many things. So, and especially coming from the food security kind of domain, what Hugo just described, there is really extremely detailed measurements, those in-depth interview, like physical assessments of nutrition that really, from a policy-making point of view, from an intervention point of view, they are really can be quite detached from the way of what we need to do to strengthen the system, because we perfectly understand the individual, we perfectly understand the family, but that family lives in a community, there is a municipality, a lot of the decisions needs to be made at the municipal level, sometimes even higher levels, and these very detailed studies help us to understand some of it, but it's not all. And so when it comes to resilience, basically the idea of measurement is around, it's really not new. So a lot of the indicators or coefficients or measurement system can be reused. It's more about like how we work with them. So one part of basically when we try to measure resilience is really not just about the availability of the resource, but let's say about the quality or about the status of the resource. Because if you have an agricultural land that it's, let's say, certain hectares, so theoretically you can produce enough food, but if the 2/3 of the land is heavily eroded or fairly degraded, then it's not the same than just saying we have this much land. You actually have much less land from a productivity point of view. So you need to have an understanding of the quality of the resource. And then from a resilience point of view, the other kind of important element is how the system interacts, how the element interact. For example, if you have if your system, like storage system, electricity system, water, irrigation system, do they have spare capacity? So if you encounter climate shock or you encounter a huge demand for electricity because of increased production needs, does the system actually have enough capacity to deal with it, or it's collapsing or falling apart and then everybody suffers? Or if you have an excess production, does the storage system actually has a capacity to store it somewhere, or it's going to rot and you basically lose it? Or everybody try to sell it in a very short time, which means that the price goes down hugely and people don't make enough money to buy food later. So it's really about how the system elements interact. The other thing also could be around if one part of your system fails, do you have any other elements in the system that you can actually replace it with? So it could be, let's say, do you have effective collaboration in between communities so that they can coordinate the action, or between municipalities, so that you can actually, supply or trade or move things from one place to another where it's more needed. And of course, the equal access. Because a lot of the things that Hugo talked about is, which we compared to our system in North America, we often don't see it. Like even a farmer somewhere, super rural Manitoba, can still access educational programs, they can still apply for funding, they can still get technical support. While in many countries, let's say now we're talking about Latin America or Central America, if you are a poor farmer, a small-scale farmer, you don't have access to services or support, even though theoretically you are entitled. Physically, it's not possible. And that kind of level of marginalization, so when we look at any services, any extension, any support provided, in many of these places, that's absolutely critical to make sure that there is a special attention paid to ensure that people that are marginalized because of their location, because of their situation, because they are single mothers, because they are disabled, because they have other issues, could access some of these systems, which very often, basically, many of these support systems are really targeted for mainstream people who already know how to work the system, basically. So they are actually very resilient from this point of view. But this is basically how when we start measuring, so we can be kind of measuring at the end the same thing, but we rather measure it more in terms of the percentages, coefficients, in terms of which part of the system or element working towards how they interact. Do we do policy reviews? Do we assess the impacts of policies? Do we assess impacts of interventions? So rather looking at this instead of asking, do we have a policy? Like, it's not that helpful if it's not implemented. Or how much financial resources are allocated for certain activities. It's also a very good indicator just to give you a snapshot that if we have a policy with 10 targets on food security, but we only finance one of them, then that's a much more useful information than knowing that our policy has 10 elements. So these kind of things. So it's really more using or working with indicators, so designing system differently than kind of reinventing a whole new system.
Thank you. I was reading some of the literature that the IICA office provided me to see if I could take a crash course in climate change. I came to the conclusion that I couldn't. But one of the things that caught my eye was this whole notion of climate-smart agriculture. And I thought, what does that really mean? And if I am either in the position of speaking to farmers or I am a farmer myself, what do I hear if I'm a farmer when someone says to me, "Oh, we've got to produce climate-smart food products and in a climate-smart agricultural environment"? What does it really mean? So I guess my question to both of you is, can you help me understand what people say people mean when they say climate-smart agriculture?
Well, I think that it means you utilize the resources you have, even in a small level, in a smart way, in a way that doesn't have a detrimental impact on the climate, or in a way that you deal in a smart way with the challenges that climate change is presenting to you. An example, we visited in Guatemala as well, by the shores of Lago Atitlán, with coffee growers dealing with coffee rust. It's very interesting. There are techniques that are simple. They are simple to rescue those coffee trees. It takes some time. You need information. You need to understand that what you're doing to the tree will affect, in one way or the other, your ability to produce, in this case, coffee in the short term, but in the midterm, in perhaps in a year or two, you will be able to produce much more than other coffee growers that didn't implement that very radical pruning that we saw there. It's really scary. The other thing is that I feel we need to understand what the role of technology might be. And I think that technology plays a big role also in climate smart agriculture. It allows us to manage the resources we have, the supplies that we use to enhance the production in a better way. But we need to make sure that technology is applicable to the realities of the developing world. It might be applicable on the plains, in Canada, in the Ukraine, in the Midwest of the United States, but probably not necessarily applicable in La Sierra Tarahumara in Chihuahua or elsewhere. So that's probably what is meant. I think that a very smart, climate-smart agriculture has to focus a lot on water. And that's the other aspect. How do we manage in a better way the little water that in some places we have for human consumption and for food production? That's a very important aspect. And there's one more piece that is just coming to my mind, and perhaps doesn't have to do anything with the definition of climate-smart production or agriculture, but it has to do with food waste. And I leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Livia?
Yeah, that's true. The food waste is now the big thing in the agriculture world. So everybody's talking about, like, there's really huge numbers. Like, I think it's from 40 to 60% food is wasted. In North America, we waste it mostly at the consumption side, but in other places, it's mostly on the production side. So it's either failing storage system, road networks, market failures, or in the actual field level. So yeah. But I think even like a lot of the examples that Hugo listed, I believe that, there's been so much work on agriculture adaptation over the last, I would say, 10 years. When we look at adaptation to climate change, agriculture was probably the first field that we started thinking about because it was so obvious that you have drought and you have floods and you can't plant. So I believe that by this time we have enough kind of actions that we can imply in the situation, and that kind of talks to the climate smart agriculture, that you can imply for certain type of crop production, for certain type of land management systems. And of course, there's always some need for adjustments, but I think there is enough information now we don't need to kind of start from scratch again. And I think in this way, like what we talked earlier and Trudy talked about, that kind of the knowledge exchange, sharing the information, bringing together people with, let's say, working in the same area but in different places to actually learn from each other, but as well as learn from the I would say 10 years of research on agriculture adaptation. I think it's extremely important, because otherwise we just keep like doing these pilot projects after pilot projects, and it's very in isolation, and they work in one place, but the funding runs out for the phase 2. So it's unless we really start using much more what's being tested, I think we won't really get too far anytime soon.
I think I've been given the eye by Audia, so I will listen to her. And what I'd like to do now, and thank you both very much, this conversation could just go on and on, because really there are so many things you have raised that are absolutely fascinating. But I'm sure that even though we have been talking up here, there are many questions from the audience, because you folks have been listening, and you're probably thinking, I'd love to ask that, and you couldn't jump in. So now is your opportunity to jump in. So, yes, please.
Well, both of the speakers were talking about, Olivia Moore used the word systems, but each of you spoke in effect about infrastructure and sort of systems that support agriculture. And one of them, for example, was the ability of moving crops and harvests to the market and access to international markets. So in terms then of strategy and having a climate-smart agriculture, having a resilient agriculture, I'm wondering if you want to say anything more about the strategic importance then of infrastructure, particularly either information and communications technology infrastructure, which can help to inform the farmers and help them to deal with challenges, and also the importance strategically of transportation. When we see in the news over the last 24 hours, there have been some severe landslides and other things which disrupt the connectivity of small and rural communities.
Hugo, would you like to?
Just briefly, perhaps, but I do think that infrastructure plays a very, very important role, not only to connect the producers to the international market, but in many cases they are not even able to connect to the local market. And I'm sorry to going back to Guatemala all the time. I'm Guatemalan, but I was born in that country.
Don't worry.
But we have gathered a lot of information through the collaboration we had with IICA in that study that was mentioned before. There are, in fact, smallholder farmers that are able to utilize, to take advantage of the infrastructure that is in place. In Sololá, with Audia, we visited communities that are producing broccoli, baby carrots, and sweet peas, even if they don't eat that, okay, for the international market, but it supports their economic or their economic growth. But there are other farmers that even in a small country like Guatemala, even if they are just 50 kilometers away, they have no possibility of connecting with the Pan-American route. So what is to do? What can a country like Guatemala do to connect those small farmers to the international market? Should we even do that? Or should we think about strengthening the possibilities, the opportunities of those communities to connect to the municipal town, to the municipal capital or the departmental capital market? That's already a big start. And certainly you need better roads. It has been an effort that has been in Guatemala, has had some good impact for the last 20 years. Since 1996, some infrastructure has evolved quickly, especially in the northwest of the country. But still, that infrastructure, in many cases, is not utilized by the smallholder farmers because they don't have sometimes the resources to even pay for the transportation of their products to the closest market. So there is a lot that needs to be done to utilize what is called, in Spanish, la obra negra, the black structure. But there is the other structure that needs to be able to utilize that infrastructure.
Olivia, would you like to add to that?
Maybe just a few things. I think there is definitely the part that Hugo talked about, like getting your product out to the market, larger or bigger, smaller, and then getting the resources and buy food. Because what often happens is, and what Hugo also mentioned, is that a lot of the communities would plant something for the market, which means that a lot of the food that they need, especially from a nutrition point of view, they actually buy. They don't, a lot of meat, eggs, milk products, they actually don't kind of grow anymore by themselves, but they buy it. So how well they can sell their products has direct impact, especially for their nutrition. Maybe they get access to staple foods, but very limited nutrition. So that's why if we fail to get a good price for the product, to sell the products, that market access has direct impact on nutrition. The other part for me, this link between agriculture and infrastructure, is also because often when we talk about planning, investment into infrastructure comes from different sources than the groups in agriculture. So infrastructure is often under economic development. There is also multilateral banks and other sources of money. There's, of course, questions around public-private partnerships that could be good experience, could be bad experiences. So it's a bit, for me, it seems that it's a little bit of a different type of world than the agriculture community and the agriculture decision-making community. So maybe there's also bit of a competition or a trade-off, like, if we build this infrastructure or with the road remote in this village, we can't build an energy facility there. So there's often that issue as well, so in the level of decision-making.
Thank you very much. Another question?
Hi, thank you very much. It's a really interesting panel, and I'm really excited. My name is Lisanne Léveillé, and I work at IICA Canada. And our sole goal, it's a small NGO, and our sole goal is to create resilient smallholder farmers community. So I'm really happy that this is the subject today. And we have a lot of partnership in Latin America, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, Cuba, Bolivia. And according to us, key to building resilient community is, agroecology. So having ecological practices and innovation that not only allows farmers to adapt to climate change, but also mitigate. And also, key for us is agrobiodiversity, so agricultural biodiversity. And we think that the more diversity of crops and varieties are in the hands of the farmers, the more resilient they'll be. And it also affects nutrition because they have a wider dietary diversity. And we have the chance that America is a center of origin for so many crops and varieties and a center of diversity. So we have some techniques like participatory plant breedings, participatory variety selection, community seed banks, but I would like to hear you talk what you think is the place of biodiversity in the creation of resilient community, and also how do we put farmers at the center of those in innovation and research and initiative. And also I just wanted to mention that for Latin American colleague, that estamos trabajando con campesinos que tienen un sorgo tortillero. Entonces, cuando no hay suficiente agua para producir maíz, al menos hay un sorgo con que se puede hacer tortillas. Entonces, we're always looking for innovation that is key for food security to the farmers before even talking export, but also to create food security of the communities.
I think the questions you have raised and the points you have raised could actually form the basis of another total big panel discussion, because each of them is very, very interesting. But I'd like to give a crack now to our two panelists to briefly respond.
Very briefly. Certainly, diversity in all its aspects is very important to resilient societies. Again and again, repeating the same country. I come from a country with 23 different languages and all the colors you can imagine in the clothes they wear. In terms of diversity, a study we did with Miguel Garcia in Haiti, we explored the role of livestock diversity for food security in small farmers. And we found that the more diversity they have, even if they have only a couple of animals, the more resilient they might be to food insecurity. You mentioned agroecology, and you mentioned biodiversity. I think this is a topic that is a matter of a very complex discussion, and I don't want to sound heretic. I honestly think that agroecology has shown very, very strong results in terms of food security. But we need to be very careful in the way we incorporate some aspects that from a northern perspective, and I don't mean the work you do and we do here necessarily just a northern perspective, but from a northern perspective when working in developing countries, how do our interventions in protected areas impact the food security status of the people who live in those areas and who have been there for thousands of years? How we guarantee that the production of corn in a specific year under the conditions of our countries do meet the needs for people to have their tortillas. I think sorgo is a millet, right? In English, I'm not sure. I'm not an agronomist. But this is a very interesting initiative. But remember that there are cultural aspects, very important cultural aspects. I would love to try the sorgo tortillas. But as a person, as a human being made out of corn, that's the essence of Los Hombres de Maíz. The cultural aspect is very important. In any way,
thank you.
Sorry.
Just before I go to Libya, Audia, are there any questions from people on the web?
We'll check.
Okay, good. Libya?
Okay, maybe just a few things. I think on the kind of the land degradation part and using sustainable practices, I think that's very critical because very often when we talk about agriculture and futures in agriculture, we talk about increasing yield. And there is a limit to increasing yield from a technological point of view, but also from the land quality and the land kind of the ability to support the crops. And very often when we look at, let's say, we are working a lot on SDG 2, on ending hunger and different options on how to end hunger. One of the things is that a lot of the estimates, when we look at what can be produced in the future, doesn't really look at, and so what's the level of land degradation? So theoretically, yes, you can use the land, but practically you can't. And so this kind of thinking actually, thinking not just in agriculture in terms of the production of the livestock of the crop, but that kind of broader environment and the impact of the practices on the broader environment and biodiversity, it's very important. And it's very hard when you think of quantitative estimates or monitoring to actually involve these things because there's definitely not enough studies, there's not enough evaluations of the impact of the practices that would be done in a large scale. So there's definitely a lot of gaps in terms of being able to work with these things at the same level how we used to work with yield and production activities.
Thank you. Another question?
Hi, my name is Carissa Wong from Bionomous Law. I have a question sort of following up on the transportation and the northern perspective. And I was wondering how important you think or what role this go local kind of concept is. In the north, we are thinking about trying to reduce our climate impact by not buying internationally transported food. And I'm wondering, when we're talking about climate change resilience, whether we can be focusing more on production that meets everyone's nutritional needs at a more local scale, where someone doesn't have to buy the meat and eggs and get the money by selling their own produce. So I'm wondering, what the connections are, how to, I mean, is there a way of, how do you balance the resilience issue as well as the mitigation? That's my question. Thank you.
Very strong questions, not easy to respond. When I say the North perspective, I mean the Western perspective, the industrialized countries perspective. Remember that in Canada, we transport food to the North. Nunavut is the most food insecure territory in Canada, with levels up to 45% of the people living there. There is a report by the Canadian Council of Academies reporting that Inuit households in Nunavut face levels of food insecurity up to 70%. So that just a clarification there. We have also issues here. And what does it mean to transport food from here to the north? We have in Canada a nutrition program, North Nutrition Program. Do they need that, yes or no? That's the first question I would like to ask. Do they need us to bring to those areas cabbage, for example? A cabbage can be $10 in the north of Canada. Do they need us to bring to the north broccoli? Have they ever eaten broccoli in the traditional foods before? The northern communities of Canada have had a better health and nutrition status before their diets became westernized, right? Without all this food transportation. Now, the problem is, how do you feed a society that is not only used, but in many cases requires food to come from the outside, and where bringing the food from other places has a lesser impact in the climate than producing the food in that particular area. I mean, if we think about the cocoa projects, the chocolate projects of IICA in Peru, how much energy would we need to produce chocolate in Canada, and what would be the climate impact of that production? That's one question. The other question is, okay, it's too polluting, and perhaps we don't need to bring chocolate from other places. Now the question is, would we be able to live a meaningful life without chocolate? I am not sure. I don't think so. Same thing applies to coffee and other goodies. Yeah.
Livia, quick response from you.
Just maybe on the nutrition side. So for very long time, it was kind of this dichotomy between nutrition and production, because it was assumed that getting a nutrition diet or food is the responsibility of the individual or family, while the production is the private sector and the government and the subsidies and all the kind of the production system. And especially with the food waste, there's a lot more talk these days, probably for the last few years, about the need for making nutritious food choices, making environmentally friendly food choices, looking at, let's say, the water used in the production of some of the products, so favoring products that use less water. We have a huge growth in organic production these days. So let's say when you go to the supermarket, you see now some of the organic products you don't even pay premium for. It's kind of became mainstream. Of course, there's also the other challenge that not every organic labor is the same. But so now we are much more conscious, seem to be both about the health part and about the environmental impact part. So I think maybe in a few years from now, most of the production could be, especially those that are very environmentally intense, come from much more sustainable sources. And if we manage to reduce waste and improve the sustainable production and kind of sourcing, then we could reduce a lot the impacts, especially impacts on the environment. And we need to make smarter choices, especially in places we can. In the north, it's not possible, but in our societies, we can, because we have access to tons of products that are much more nutritious and much more better for our health than just chocolate and coffee.
It's very good.
It's very good, exactly. Some of us could not live without chocolate, so let's face it. I think it's about time to wrap things up. Oh, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, and do we have time for one more question?
That's the last question. This is it.
Oh, that's the last. Oh, that's from the web. Can you give it back to me so I can read it properly? When you see CC, that also means Cynthia Curry. So, and the question from the web is: what is the low-hanging fruit for Canada to address with climate change and agriculture? And if I can just add a little bit to that, in the context of IICA's role, because we're here as an IICA forum, what can IICA do to address this whole subject within the Americas? Or the low-hanging fruit, as they call it. I love this terminology.
I think back to the information and knowledge, but knowledge that can go quickly, regularly, timely, to the desks of the people who make decisions, but also to the communities who are facing the impacts of climate change. Developing, harmonizing tools that are easy to apply, that are easy to interpret, that are easy to present, but that do have the validity and reliability that is needed, because otherwise we won't be able to know what we're measuring.
Maybe a few things. So, especially from an IICA point of view, we used to think of big investment, let's say, going to infrastructure mining, but now there are big investments going to agriculture globally. In many countries, there are serious investments that are agriculture and is focused on producing for certain, as an investment for certain countries. So we definitely need to make sure that how these investments are designed so because that's what happens is limit access of people to their own land that they used to farm for long times. It could have a huge environmental impact, especially in terms of the water, because a lot of these productions can be very water intensive. So first kind of thing is how we design investments in agriculture that they don't interfere or negatively impact the processes and the land and the access to land in the countries. The second is in many countries, including Canada, we are seeing huge increases in large-size farms. Smaller farms are disappearing, and the medium farms are disappearing as well. So you have the large farms and some sort of a hobby agriculture on the side with some organics. And so if we talk resilience, we need to have diversified landscapes, which is very important from a biodiversity point of view. It's important from climate change adaptation point of view. So we need to much more think about that, how the kind of the agriculture activity just spread over the landscape, so that we ensure all those other benefits that agriculture can provide beyond just kind of the production and the yield out of land.
Excellent. I think we've run out of time, unfortunately, to ask for any other questions. But if I could just sum this up by saying that some of the things that I'm hearing, and I hope that you're hearing the same thing that I'm hearing, is that this conversation needs to continue. And we've got to engage policymakers across the hemisphere in this conversation. And if I could just say, from my perspective, we need to have more discussions in public fora about the impact of agriculture on climate change. Because agriculture is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And we're all, as countries, are talking about the need to meet certain goals. There are conferences, there are studies, and what have you, not only in Canada, but around the world. But you don't have the conversation in a public fora as we are having today. This is one in I mean, so to me, this is my takeaway, I would think, is that you folks should do what you have to do to engage your communities in having discussions in a more public fora about the impact of agriculture on climate change. Because if you leave agriculture aside, then believe you me, you're not going to, or we are not going to meet our goals in terms of meeting those international obligations. And we're not doing ourselves any service by excluding agriculture from the conversation. I think the role of IICA, as you've said, is a sharing of information. If, from my perspective as someone who's been in the field before, if I could just add to that, that sharing of information in plain, simple language, please, is what is required. Don't come into a forum or a community group and talk about climate, this and this, that, and the other, and use all sorts of language that people don't have a clue what you're talking about. Talk to them in plain language. Simple language gets through, people understand, and they act. We've heard also from our discussions today the impact of water. You know, people don't talk about it, but, you know, water on agriculture and our resilience of our systems is a major thing. And we need to have more of a discussion on that. And there certainly is a role for IICA to play in that conversation. I always have this challenge in that I write things down and then I can't read my handwriting. But maybe the last point would be investments in agriculture that do not have a negative impact on the land that we're trying to nourish, the land that we're trying to become more productive. So there are many other things that I'm sure you've heard today that we can go on talking about. This is a wonderful start to a discussion that I like to see in Canada our policymakers engage in. And as they say, timing is everything in this world, and having our policymakers engage in this discussion is absolutely critical. And in talking about policymakers engaging in this discussion, we now have the honor of having the Parliamentary Secretary to our Prime Minister here with us today. I'm not going to do the formal introductions. I'm going to leave that to Audia. But just before I do, I'd like to thank our two panelists. You guys have been fantastic. This has been a really, really good discussion. You have shared a lot of information. You have shared a lot of knowledge. And you have shared a lot of your own personal experiences. And to me, this is what makes the conversation so very rich, so very dynamic. And the questions that you have asked here have been excellent. What are you going to try to do, Pedro?
Thank you.
Okay. He's coming behind me, and I'm sort of looking, thinking, what have I done now? And so I want to commend IICA, Dr. Villalobos, and Audia. This is absolutely fascinating, and I wish you all the very best in the future because you are an integral part of us all reaching a better world, and also an integral part in making sure that our countries fully benefit from all of the wonderful things that we grow in our respective countries. So thank you both very much again. I don't think of two better panelists.
I don't have a mic, but on behalf of IICA and our delegation here in Canada, I would like to thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's a small present for you. And thank you. For you as well, Dr. Hu. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Excellent. Does this go on with the fisherman's friend?
Thanks so much, Cynthia, and the panel. Before I do my formal thanks, though, I want to introduce the final poll question, if we could, on Slido. Although this, you got so much information that you're going to be kind of confused. But please, by the end of this session, just put in your reflections in terms of the question there. At this time, it's my privilege to have with us and to just say a few brief words, Parliamentary Secretary and Member of Parliament, Selina Cesar-Chivans. And I know she's in the middle of Parliament, so we really, really appreciate her taking time out just to greet us and to share with us the government's stance on climate change. Please, Selina.
Now, I'm not sure if we're still in morning or afternoon, so I think we might be in the afternoon. Bonjour à tous, je m'appelle Selina Cesar-Chivans et je suis le député du Whitby et aussi le secrétaire parlementaire de le Premier ministre Justin Trudeau. And I would like to thank you for having me here today, and thank you for the important work you are doing with regard to promoting sustainable agriculture. I'm going to pause for my speech for just a moment to say that I read in the Toronto Star a couple of weeks back, maybe, that 500,000 people globally are going to die because they do not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. So food security for me is something that is very important and an area by which I think everyone in the world could take a leadership on. And I think Canada, with its vast agricultural lands, our scientific research, our being surrounded coast to coast to coast by water, really need to take advantage of our position geographically, but also our leadership in terms of helping the most poorest in our society, who, of course, are substantially impacted by climate change. So I thank you very much for the work that you are doing in this regard and your leadership on this file. As you have heard from the Prime Minister, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and over again from members of our caucus, this government understands that protecting the environment and growing the economy go hand in hand. Supporting a clean economy will help position Canada to take advantage of opportunities in the new global economy by diversifying the economy and opening up access to new markets while reducing emissions and generating well-paying jobs for Canadians. We know that the time for burying our heads in the sand is long past. When he signed the Paris Agreement at COP21 last December, Prime Minister Trudeau did more than make an historic commitment to combat climate change. It was also an acknowledgement that meaningful progress in this fight requires collaboration on a global scale. It signified a return to form for Canada and was a public declaration of our commitment to live up to our international obligations. We also know that we need collaboration and partnership here at home. We recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all solution and that the provinces and territories must be full partners as we move forward on meeting our environmental commitments. That is why the government is working collaboratively with the provinces and territories in developing a pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change to ensure that we meet our collective target. We know that none of this can happen without proper funding, and Budget 2016 makes significant investments to make sure Canada lives up to its commitments. We are making investments in clean technology, using the tax system to encourage investment in clean energy generation, and providing billions of dollars to address climate change and air pollution, protect ecologically sensitive areas, and restore public trust in the environmental assessment process. We are also investing in agricultural research that will, among other things, help promote environmental sustainability in the agriculture sector. This is a government that is taking its environmental obligations seriously. We recognize that it is each generation's responsibility to leave a cleaner, healthier environment to subsequent generations, and we do our part to make sure that we deliver. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Sorry, I cannot stay. I actually left caucus, and I have to return back to our caucus meeting. So thank you very much again for all the work that you do on this. Friends, the end is in sight. So thank you so much for your patience. And I want to just underscore that climate change has clearly been presented to us as an issue, not just anecdotally that we should be concerned about, but of real challenge and concern to us in various ways. I mean, the panelists shared with us not just the obvious and the physical manifestations of climate change, but we need to go a little bit further to look at the human side, as Hugo pointed out, the psychological side. Issues that are not so obvious when we think of how resilient we are in terms of climate change, in terms of coordination, looking at our healthcare systems. Selena just pointed out collaboration. The DG spoke about collaboration. I think truly spoke about collaboration. It's a common denominator in all that we do, and we should leave here remembering that collaboration is key if we're going to make a difference. Joint projects, the importance of dialogue. I think Cynthia underscored that at the end. It needs to continue. And this is how we get the knowledge being shared, and this is how we have various interventions to move on as we do our work, interventions that will make a difference. So I want to thank the panel again, and I would like to thank our Member of Parliament and Parliamentary Secretary, Selena, for actually, she left caucus to be with us. Can you imagine that? It shows that it's a very important subject. She felt that she was, she had an obligation to come and share her support. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Please have a seat. Come and get comfortable. Okay, so our ability to cope with these challenges will require a toolbox of solutions. And we have heard some ways in which we could start as of right now. And I'm sure that each of us, as we leave and go to our respective offices and place of work, we will be thinking about how we could move with some of our own interventions. And IICA Canada, the delegation in Canada, is at your service. And as our Director General pointed out, we are a window to the world, to the rest of the Americas in terms of our offices. Our resources, in terms of physical resources in Canada, tend to be dynamo, small but very powerful. But we also have links with our technical experts throughout the hemisphere. So please use us in terms of your collaborations. Our delegation is indebted to a growing number of associates that and I shared some of them this morning when we looked at our performance last year. Colleagues who have shared our vision of improving livelihoods in the Americas, of addressing food security or food insecurity, I should say, improving productivity and competitiveness in agriculture. And those who have collaborated with our delegation on project proposals, on doing project activities, sharing information, responding to technical requests, networking, the list could continue. I must express my appreciation to you all for always willing to broach that new horizon together with IICA Canada. We're grateful for also an informal group of advisors, and that group is growing, and we appreciate you. We have Cynthia, we have Bob Lang, who isn't here with us, but he's always, sharing information with us that is quite useful. Barry Stemshorn, who was here and he had to slip out. And as I said, there are several persons who we can call on at any time to be a sounding board and to help strengthen our network. I want to thank you. And I'm beginning to think that our Director General has a clone. Not only is he looking younger, but he's able to share himself, with all the countries in the Americas, the 34 countries, and look as fresh as a daisy. We recognize the demands on his time, and we thank him for joining us today. Thank you, Director General. Our thanks to Max Digital Webcasting and Baldwin Audiovisuals for ensuring a quality product here in terms of sound, etc., as well as via video. We want to thank you again to our colleagues for really helping us to get the message out. The Sheraton is strategically placed right next door. How beautiful is that? But I want to thank the Sheraton for consistently providing quality service, and you're going to taste some of the fare that they have, usually excellent. And we want to acknowledge Lolita and her team, especially Tony, who's around and has been helping us. I want to thank Sam, who is our photographer, and I apologize for a little break just now, but Sam is on the ball in terms of capturing these precious moments. To our amazing team, multi-talented team in the office of IICA Canada, who's each of them not afraid to stretch to new heights, I want to offer my personal appreciation. All of what we did during the year 2015 and what we did today is a reflection of true teamwork. Every member of the team, hands on deck. I want to thank you. We treasure our relationships built over the years with our stakeholders, and we thank each of you for carving out some time this morning and spending it with us, and I trust that you feel that the morning was well spent. Before you leave, there's an evaluation form that is in your package or on the table. Please take a minute or two just to complete the evaluation. You can do it over lunch and while you're networking. Our Director General will be with us for the remainder of the afternoon, so please, he's here. You can talk with him. You can get some more information or just exchange greetings. At this point, I want to close this morning's session, and I want to encourage you to take the message to your respective offices. Share the message that IICA Canada is open for business, and we will deliver results. Thank you so much.